All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia here with my co-host Brian Pfeiffer. In this episode, we bring you this week's labor news. We bring you updates from the Hollywood workers' struggles, upcoming protests in Milwaukee against Ron Desantis, a recent Supreme Court decision concerning an employer's right to sue a union, the Tampa 5, a strike at medieval times, organizing at Trader Joe's, United Airlines pilots, OPEIU strike update, and much more. But first, we're going to check out some music. This week, it's a band called The Specials from England. And full disclosure, I used to play bass in a Latin ska band called Roca Hueca. And while I was in that band, my bandmates schooled me on some ska music, and one of the bands I grew to appreciate was The Specials. I like them because you'll often find righteous, anti-racist messages in their songs. So here's one about your racist friend.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the new edition of We Rise Fighting. We are dedicating this episode to Juneteenth and Pride 2023 events nationwide. We're bringing this to you in the spirit of the Black freedom struggle and the Stonewall Rebellion. We're beginning with a quote from the late transgender warrior Leslie Feinberg, who's a proud and steadfast UAW National Writers Guild member. From their book, Transgender Liberation, a Movement Whose Time Has Come, Feinberg wrote, quote, "Like racism and all forms of prejudice, bigotry against transgender people is a deadly carcinogen. We are pitted against each other in order to keep us from seeing each other as allies. Genuine bonds of solidarity can be forged between people who respect each other's differences and are willing to fight their enemy together. We are the class that does the work of the world and can revolutionize it. We can win true liberation," end quote. So listeners, this episode is dedicated to the spirit of these longtime struggles. And Rick's going to start us out with the Directors Union in Hollywood.
All right, yeah, this article is coming to us from The Guardian. And the headline reads, Directors Union reaches tentative deal with Hollywood studios as writers strike. And the article goes as follows. The Directors Guild of America, or DGA, which represents film and television directors, announced late on Saturday that it had reached a tentative agreement with Hollywood's major studios, averting a possible work stoppage. The development comes as Hollywood writers are currently on strike, and actors represented by the SAG-AFTRA union are currently holding a strike authorization vote. The DGA union will proceed to ask its 19,000 members to vote on the tentative 3-year contract, which includes gains in wages, residuals, and protections around the use of artificial intelligence. The agreement stipulates, quote, generative AI cannot replace the duties performed by members, unquote. The agreement came after several weeks during which Hollywood writers have been on strike. Previous negotiations between directors and the studio took place earlier this year without reaching an agreement, but bargaining restarted 3 weeks ago once writers began their strike. I think that's important to note. The ratification vote is scheduled for Tuesday, June 6th. Writers and actors have also been seeking protections included in contracts around the use of artificial intelligence. Writers have criticized the rejection of their proposal around artificial intelligence by the studios, instead only being offered annual meetings to discuss the issue. Prior to the directors reaching a tentative agreement, the Writers Guild of America criticized Hollywood studios over the anticipation of using an agreement with the directors to force writers to accept similar terms to end their strike. Interesting stuff happening over there, kind of, watching how the different labor struggles are being waged, against each other, kind of, sort of. I'm not sure how to read this entirely, but I should note that I went to the DGA's press releases, and their last press release offers a list of unions who express some solidarity with what was happening. And those unions included the Teamsters, IATSE, which is the stagehandlers union, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Laborers Union, and several others. So that's what's going on with the Directors Guild of America. Up next with news from Milwaukee, Brian has some news from Milwaukee RNC.
All right, thanks, Rick. As we reported previously in previous episodes, the Republican National Convention will be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July of 2024. The first so-called presidential debate is going to be held August 23rd, 2023 in Milwaukee. Capitalist vultures such as Ron Desantis, who's waging a scorched earth campaign against poor and working people, and in particular, Black people, Latino people, and LGBTQ community in Florida, Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, who's similar to DeSantis in South Carolina when she was governor. She was also a representative of the U.S. government and is really guilty of war crimes. And others plan on having a debate in Milwaukee, August 23rd, 2023. These politicians have the blood of millions of poor and working people worldwide on their hands, literally. They are racist, bigots, anti-union, oppose any safety nets and regulations, peddle lies about the environmental disasters, and are guilty of many other crimes against humanity. And it's important to note that they work very closely or take cues from right-wing organizations like the John Birch Society, which is based in Appleton, Wisconsin, and the Bradley Foundation, which is based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Many union and community organizations will be protesting August 23rd, 2023, and there will be a rally beginning at 6 p.m. at Red Arrow Park, or otherwise known as Dontre Hamilton Park. Dontre Hamilton was a young African-American brother who was murdered by a policeman in the park in 2014. So some community members call it Dontre Hamilton Park. It's known in the city also as Red Arrow Park in Milwaukee, followed by a march. So that will be August 23rd, 2023, to protest the so-called presidential debate, and the march and rallies against the RNC in July are still on and still being organized. And throughout the course of the next year, there will be a variety of actions as well. All right, Rick, got some Teamster news for us.
Yeah, this one involves a case involving some members of the Teamsters, and the company we had actually reported on this back in the day, Cafe. This involves a court decision, a Supreme Court decision around strikes. And to give everyone a little background first, the workers in this case who drive concrete mixers went out on strike. At the appointed hour for the strike, several drivers drove their truck back to the company, and in this case, the name of the company is Glacier, back to the company headquarters and walked off the job. The company was unable to deliver the concrete, and some of it hardened, requiring the company to scramble to find a way to safely dump the concrete, destroy it, and cart it away. So basically, the debate here in the Supreme Court is whether or not companies have the right to sue unions for damages resulting from a strike. That's basically what's at play here. And I picked up this article from Labor Notes, and it's titled, "Unions Can Still Strike, Don't Let the Supreme Court Tell You Otherwise." And if you haven't checked out Labor Notes, I do recommend it. Labor Notes and I go back a long, long time to like the year 2000. It's been schooling me, keeping me current on labor news. I do appreciate Labor Notes. But the article reads as follows. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters Local 174 is outrageous, valuing property over workers' rights, but it could have been much worse. Unions still have the right to strike. Employers still can't generally sue unions in state court for losses caused by strikes. But the decision does open the door to whittling away those rights more in the future. The practical impact of the court's decision is that employers will be suing unions more often for alleged property damage caused by strikes, and that therefore unions and their attorneys are likely to be more cautious. But the court did not do what many had feared it would do in this case, which was overrule long-standing precedent that employers generally cannot sue unions in state court over activities like strikes covered by the National Labor Relations Act. Instead, it found that this case fell under an already existing exemption for intentional damage to employer property or failure to take reasonable precautions to prevent such damage. Workers and unions are right to be furious at this ruling, but we should be careful not to sensationalize it or overstate it, which could do more damage to the right to strike than the ruling itself does by making workers scared to exercise it. Okay, so that's all from Labor Notes, and they also include a quote from Sean O'Brien, Teamster president, and it goes, quote, American workers must remember that their right to strike has not been taken away, unquote, said Teamsters President Sean O'Brien in response to the ruling. Quote, all workers, union and non-union alike, will forever have the right to withhold their labor, unquote, his statement went on. The Teamsters will strike any employer when necessary, no matter their size or the depth of their pockets. Unions will never be broken by this court or any other. Today's shameful ruling is simply one more reminder that the American people cannot rely on their government or their courts to protect them. They cannot rely on their employers. We must rely on each other. We must engage in organized collective action. We can only rely on the protections inherent in the power of unions, was Sean O'Brien's response, which I, wholly appreciate. And, just a reminder too that each time, a law like this is passed, it takes maybe one generation before it's fully institutionalized and at work, and people forget, that it even happened in the first place. And I think that speaks to a lot of labor history. We're at a point now where just to go on a quote unquote legal strike in the US requires unions to jump through so many hoops. And, that's been a process that's taken generations, and things like the Red Scare, McCarthyism, just regular good old everyday union busting, a Cold War, all that stuff has shaped labor law. This is just the latest thing, but still, we got to highlight this and keep it in the collective memory so people aren't scared, just as the Labor Notes article said. Let's not get scared about this. More like President Sean O'Brien said. Now is the time to flex. This one court ruling isn't going to make striking illegal. So just putting that out there, that is the update on the Supreme Court decision, but involving the Teamsters.
Thanks, Rick. The Committee to Stop FBI Repression has put out a press release about a very important developing situation in Florida. The press release states, quote, on March 6, 2023, 4 students and workers were arrested as well as brutalized by the University of South Florida police during a protest against a bill that would gut Florida higher education. In an act of vicious repression, 5 protesters are now facing 8 felony counts, along with several misdemeanors. 3 of the 5 face 10 years in prison, and the other 2 face 5 years. It is clear that the governor appointed Florida State Attorney Suzanne Lopez wants to make an example of students who protest Ron Desantis and put these protesters in prison. One of those charged is also an AFSCME union member illegally fired after the cop attacks, and that's being fought. We support these brave women and demand that charges against the Tampa 5 be dropped immediately. We stand in solidarity with the Tampa 5 and show our unwavering commitment to defending all who stand for peace, higher learning, and diversity end quote. The Committee to Stop FBI Repression is asking people supporters to sign on to the statement in support of the Tampa Five as an individual or a group. And please share that statement widely. It's available at stopfbi.org. That's stopfbi.org. We know that the police and the FBI are not friends of workers. In fact, their job is to work on behalf, the FBI and the police, that is, on behalf of the rich. And so we are, of course, here at We Rise Fighting in total solidarity, and also, like the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, demand these outrageous charges be dropped. All right, Rick, we're going to talk about the Medieval Times performers.
All right, this article is coming from the Orange County Register, and the headline reads as follows: Striking Medieval Times performers to hold rally as union effort stalls. And I just cut and pasted some of the parts of this article, including this one section that said that the performers launched an unfair labor practice strike against the company on February 11th, claiming management has given substantial pay hikes to workers at other medieval times castles, while their wages remain low amid unsafe working conditions. There's another part that says about 30 of the castle's queens, trumpet players, chancellors, knights, and squires voted in November to join the American Guild of Variety Artists. But management, they say, has consistently blocked their efforts to secure a living wage and provide improved safety measures. Another part of the article says this specifically, and I really wanted to highlight this. Others opted not to strike, but are still part of the bargaining unit. I want to hash that out in a second. The article continues just for a little bit, saying the unionization in Buena Park came on the heels of another union victory earlier last year at Medieval Times Lyndhurst, New Jersey castle, where workers also secured AGVA membership. After the New Jersey location voted to become part of the union, Medieval Times gave a $1 an hour raise to employees at every castle except New Jersey, she said. And after Buena Park unionized, management started giving knights a 25% raise, while others in the show cast got a 15 to 20% raise. That happened at every castle except Buena Park and New Jersey. All right, now these are the lessons that I wanted to extract from this. There's a couple of important ones. First off, like I said, that line, others opted not to strike but are still part of the bargaining unit. That's by all definitions a scab. For those who are new to labor, a scab is someone who crosses the picket line. So while union workers are waging a strike, a scab is someone who crosses the picket line and keeps production going for the bosses. This is why we on this show always emphasize the union and community alliance, or just another reason why we emphasize the union and community alliances. The existence of scabs, unfortunately, comes as a byproduct of this wretched system of capitalism, which pits workers one against the other on the race to the bottom. So yeah, I'm mad at scabs, but actually I'm more mad at the system that created them. So there was that I picked up on this article. And also, I really do hate this as an employer tactic. It's just so dirty. Basically, they're telling all their workers, this is how I see it. Medieval Times is just telling all their workers, union and non-union, hey, we've had this money for higher wages all along, but we just didn't want to give it to you. And then some non-union workers will eat it up and think, I don't want to be a member of the union because it pays less. And really the lesson, in my opinion, should be solidarity and unionization by the non-union workers. So yeah, keep the wage increases, but also recognize that it came from the struggle of the workers who went against the bosses. And the real end game should be to go wall-to-wall union. So just wanted to put that all out there. And also, man, this article, the way it talks about the workers, like about 30 of the castle's kings, trumpet players, chancellors, knights, and squires. I don't know why this writer wrote about them like that, but they're workers. They're workers who have schedules, who have roles, who have lines, who have to deal with kids and tourists and, have to pay rent, have to pay utility. So just to present them in this light, I thought that was, I don't know, a product of having like a total of 5 labor reporters in the nation who can report on this stuff in, frankly, an intelligent manner. But maybe that's a fight for another episode, or, a rant for another episode. Either way, that's what's going down at medieval times. And I thought that was a lesson worth extracting because you see stuff like this. My understanding is that FedEx has done stuff like this so as to not bring on the Teamsters like UPS. You know, FedEx will offer slightly higher wages. I think Delta Airlines has done the same, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this is a common boss tactic, and we just wanted to highlight it on this show. So peeps are more hip to it. So up next, we have Brian with some updates from Trader Joe's. What's going on with Trader Joe's, Brian?
All right, so Trader Joe's has been found guilty by the National Labor Relations Board of violating worker rights at a store that unionized. And there's a union now called Trader Joe's United, and they're organizing workers there. And the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, and this is a release by Trader Joe's United, quote, last week lodged a complaint against Trader Joe's after TJU, Trader Joe's United, filed a charge about the company's management illegally removing union literature from a Minnesota store's break room and preventing workers from posting flyers about organizing. The release continues. The store ended up winning its union election and is one of the 4 Trader Joe's locations to successfully unionize despite facing union busting attempts from Trader Joe's corporate. The fact that the NLRB filed this complaint against Trader Joe's means they looked into the union's allegations and found merit in them. The press release concludes, we're happy to see the NLRB taking action against the countless other unfair labor practice charges we filed against Trader Joe's. These tactics are being used to keep crew members from fighting for the better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions we deserve, and we need to call it out every time, end quote. And as Rick said previously, every time we go into the store, Trader Joe's, if that's where you choose to shop, tell the workers you support them and their union and their struggle. They need a lot of support. There's more information about their campaign at individual stores and nationwide and various other organizing that's taking place at traderjoesunited.org, traderjoesunited.org. All right, we're going to talk again, Rick, about the pilots.
That's right. Pilots are, man, they're in action lately. So this article is coming from Reuters, and the headline reads, United Airline Pilots Union votes to authorize a strike vote. And the body goes as follows. The Union for United Airline Pilots has unanimously voted to authorize a strike vote. The union chair sent a letter to pilots on Friday. Quote, you'll receive more communication regarding this impending strike vote in the coming days, unquote, the letter says. A spokesman for the Airline Pilots Association, or ALPA, said it has not yet set a date for the strike vote. United's contract came up for renewal in 2019, and negotiations have been underway for 5 years. Last year, its pilots overwhelmingly voted against a tentative contract, which the union said fell short of what members were seeking. Since then, United pilots have been protesting for a better deal. And, you know, I wanted to bring this up again because here in Denver, we have the 5th or one of the top 5 busiest airports on the planet. And United Airlines is one of the biggest corporations, one of the biggest airlines at Denver International Airport. So the threat of a strike by pilots, by ramp agents, by just United Airlines workers at Denver International Airport, that's kind of a big deal. And so we're going to keep, people posted, going to keep people updated on this and other pilot strikes, but that's what's happening right now with the United Airline pilots. Brian's going to close us off tonight, so go ahead and take it away, Brian. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rick. Attacks on student loan forgiveness threaten millions in the U.S., reports peoplesdispatch.org. Quote, U.S. senators from the capitalist Republican and Democratic parties pushed to quickly approve the bipartisan debt ceiling deal on Thursday night, June 1. Republicans, led by Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, successfully negotiated severe cuts on government spending in a way that will hurt workers the most of any class. By kicking millions off of food and health benefits, cutting the IRS, making it easier for the wealthy to evade taxes, and officially putting an end date to the current freeze on student loan payments. Senate leaders pushed this bill through to ostensibly to avoid a government default. Typically slow-moving Congress quickly funneled through the debt ceiling deal, much as it infamously funneled through a bill putting down a potential railroad worker strike last year in record time, end quote. Also on May 24th in the same article, quote, the House of Representatives in the Congress approved a measure that would not only eliminate student debt relief and end the pause on payments, it would change interest canceled due to the pause, and it could potentially hold borrowers responsible for retroactive payments from the past 3 years of the pause. The Senate passed the same bill on June 2nd, but Biden has vowed to veto the resolution once it reaches his desk, end quote. Now, here at We Rise Fighting, as Rick mentioned, with Brother O'Brien, with the Supreme Court ruling with the concrete company, these attacks on poor and working people in the United States is crying out for an intervention by organized labor beyond protest rallies and sending postcards and lobbying. The National AFL-CIO is headquartered in D.C., and there are millions of workers within hours of the city. Workers could make the profits stop and make things ungovernable. Unions have the resources to do so. We know that based on the money that's spent for elections, for example. Some ideas that have been kicked around for this are a Mass Solidarity Day or Freedom Summer this summer. It could be called in DC with direct action components, along with similar actions in cities and towns nationwide. Unions spend tens of millions during elections. These resources must be used for direct actions to intervene in the class struggle. Ricky, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, always, right? These parliamentary struggles, man. How long did some of these union leaders want? That's why we don't report on these things, is because we just want to highlight the strikes and the direct actions, because those are the things that actually gets the goods. The parliamentary struggles, they take so long, and I'll speak for myself, probably for the both of us, though, in saying that the real goal there is to negotiate the terms of the exploitation. And how much time do you want for that? Some of us here in the labor movement just envision a world without exploitation altogether, without oppressors altogether. We don't want to be the new oppressors. We don't want to change or negotiate the terms of the exploitation. And here on this show, at least, we believe that a quicker route to that is through struggle in the workplace, strikes, that sort of thing. So I feel you, Brian.
All right. So next up, we got similar frame up, drop the charges against the Atlanta Solidarity Fund activist. Again, quote, this is a press release put out by the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. Quote, they condemn the May 31 arrest of 3 organizers with the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, or ASF. The arrest of the 3 organizers who are being called the ASF-3 represents an increase in state repression against the Stop Cop City movement. The ASF has played a pivotal role in jail support and the bailing out of arrested Stop Cop City activists. It continues, on the morning of May 31st, the Atlanta Police Department and Georgia Bureau of Investigation conducted a militarized SWAT raid and executed a search warrant on the 3 activists. The state is alleging trumped up charges of money laundering, quote unquote, and charity fraud, quote unquote. These arrests are meant to further criminalize any form of dissent against the building of Cop City. The ASF was started in 2017 and was instrumental in supporting and defending protesters arrested during the 2020 George Floyd uprisings and Stop Cop City movement. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp released a statement following the arrest of the ASF-3, referring to them as, quote, criminals who facilitated and encouraged domestic terrorism, end quote. The only crime the ASF-3 are guilty of is defending the people from violent state repression that is meant to silence any form of dissent against Cop City. If found guilty of these trumped up charges, a dangerous precedent will be set for those organizing against political repression in the future. The Committee to Stop FBI Repression is urging all supporters to stand in solidarity with ASF-3 and demand the charges be dropped now, end quote. For more information and to sign a petition, you can go to stopfbi.org, stopfbi.org. And for those listeners who don't know about Cop City, it's an attempt to raze and demolish and destroy a wonderful environmental area of trees and parks in a predominantly Black and brown community in Atlanta, and to build a massive complex. This is what they want to do, but there's mass resistance, as this release states, against this. They want to build a massive police Cop City, which would train police. They will bring in police from Israel and all over the world. And of course, this will be used as it was, even in a more expansive way if this was built, to oppress Black and brown people in the neighborhoods. And it would also give the bosses a huge base of repression in the South to attack unions. And that's besides the information in the press release we shared. Part of the attack of this is that this is a huge attack on unions and working people, because we know the FBI and the police, again, do not support workers. They work on behalf of the rich, as we have a hundreds-year legacy of that in the South. And it's the resistance there is going to continue against Cop City. And we wish our fellow workers and community members there in Atlanta well. And for more information on the ongoing campaign, you can go to stopfbi.org. And tomorrow, during the city council, we'll vote on the funding of Cop City in Atlanta. So in many urban centers in this country, Atlanta, especially poor and working people, and of course, Black and brown communities and students and youth, are suffering from all these budget cuts from Congress and locally. And now the city council has before it to vote on the funding of more cops, when that's exactly the last thing that we need. So tomorrow, there's going to be massive protest at the Atlanta City Council, 55 Trinity Avenue Southwest in Atlanta. And this will start at 11 a.m. and we shall see where things go. And the slogan is, no matter the vote, Cop City will never be built. So we wish our friends well there in Atlanta. Tomorrow, June 5th, Atlanta City Hall. All right. And Rick, our friends at Railroad Workers United have won a victory. The Teamsters, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, the Railroad Workers United newsletter, email newsletter, published a piece that a two-person crew becomes law in Minnesota. So based on the activism of the union local and support from fellow unions and community members, the Governor Tim Walz signed a two-person bill on May 24th. The bill also addresses other rail safety issues supported by the BLET, including the addition of 2 new state rail safety inspectors and state funding for the Northern Lights Express. And Joel Miller, a chairperson of the BLET's Minnesota SLB, says, quote, "This is a culmination of 10 years of hard work by the BLET Minnesota State Legislative Board." But we would also say that this is also the result of the Railroad Workers United battles last fall to demand safety and to demand wage increases, but also safety, which this law will address in some regard. Do you have any thoughts on this, Rick?
Yeah, speaking of parliamentary struggles, at the same time, whatever we can get, right? Whatever we can win. So kudos to Railroad Workers United. Um, I think this is also long overdue. If you remember, a few months back, I was reporting on how many train derailments the U.S. had seen, and it was like at that point, in the year, it was like I think we were like 12 weeks into the year or something like that, and we were averaging somewhere between 1 and 2 train derailments per week. So yeah, these are people's communities, backyards. This is putting entire communities in danger. So whatever safety protocols we can offer, by all means, and what better place to get those safety protocols than from the workers themselves. So yes, thank you for letting us know what's going on with that struggle.
All right, thanks, Rick. We have, as a very important component of our show, internationalism. And what we mean by that is we take the view that there are no borders in the workers' struggle. And we report from that vantage point, that viewpoint here at We Rise Fighting. And in that spirit, we are reporting here that Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro makes an historic trip to Brazil for the South American President Summit. And the People's Dispatch had a report, and we, from them, President Maduro deemed the meeting a, quote, historic and transcendental event and an important step to reactivating comprehensive joint work between the two countries. Brazilian President Luiz Lula da Silva and Venezuelan President Maduro participated in a joint press conference on May 29th, 2023, from the presidential palace in Brasilia, and highlighted the importance of the neighboring countries resuming ties. You remember that da Silva was recently elected president over the fascist Bolsonaro. The press conference was held following a bilateral meeting between the heads of state ahead of the South American President's Summit. President Lula highlighted that the summit is important for the future of the region. He said, quote, This week, I will receive the presidents of South America and Brasilia so that together we can discuss the future of our region. No country grows alone. We have to work with our neighbors to build partnerships for the economic development of the region, strengthening cultural ties and defending democracy, end quote. He wrote on Twitter. The president of the Venezuela Republic, Maduro, denounced the U.S. and other imperialist sanctions, blockades, and other attacks on his nation, Cuba, and other independent nation states. He then stressed that a new world of geopolitics is emerging, and that new world has very important players. There was talk of a unipolar world where the North American empire was dominant, that has declined, and the tendency to decline is definitive, Maduro asserted. On the other hand, Maduro highlighted the role of the BRICS in the configuration of the new global geopolitics. BRICS is an acronym for 5 regional economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And President Maduro said, quote, a powerful movement that today becomes the spearhead of the processes of change in world power. Presidents from Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Uruguay also participated in the summit. This was the first type of meeting in almost 10 years, according to President da Silva of Brazil. All right, Rick, so our friends in South America are making positive movements for the people. They are working on workers' rights and bringing food and education and healthcare to the masses, as opposed to the U.S., which is bombing, invading, and sanctioning the world and destroying workers' rights here at home. So we wish our friends down in South America and the Caribbean well. Our friends in Cuba, which is a workers' state, of course, they would be in a much better position if they didn't have to deal with the U.S. blockade, which causes so much suffering to the Cuban people. But despite that, they still advance, and they are making great advances in the LGBTQ arena, as well as workers' rights. The National Network on Cuba recently led a delegation, along with many other organizations, to Cuba, and had a very rich and wonderful delegation and information sharing with Cuba in many different regards. So they will be reporting on this in the Cuba's Queer Rights Revolution webinar, which is a Pride Month webinar this month. And this will be detailing some of the information from that trip. And this will be Thursday, June 15th. And there's more information at womeninstruggle.org. And this is an affiliate of the Women's International Democratic Federation. And they state on the webinar that just 90 miles from DeSantis's Florida, Socialist Cuba is making huge advances, and they just passed the Families Code, which is a trend-setting historic code for the country, which takes a view of the modern-day family as it actually exists. And some questions will be discussed and raised, such as how did Cuba achieve the most advanced policy in the world? On these questions, why isn't the U.S. media reporting it? Why does Biden maintain Trump's punishing blockade measures and keep Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list? And they will also have on the webinar LGBTQ activists from across the U.S. who went to Cuba to see for themselves. And participants on the webinar will also learn about how queer rights are being prioritized from the grassroots to the National Assembly in Cuba, and why U.S. queers should work to end the U.S. blockade, and how you can join next year's delegation. So that webinar is a Pride Month webinar, Thursday, June 15th, 8 Eastern, 6 Mountain, 7 Central, 5 Pacific, and more information is available at womeninstruggle.org. And Rick, if I recall correctly, you, at one time, did you visit the Caribbean?
Yes, I did go to Cuba, and really, good Lord, that really left a huge mark. I think there's so many lessons that we can learn from Cuba. I think one of the biggest things that I walked away with was the inner city gardens. Cuba really developed its inner city gardens during the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union, because at that time, the Soviet Union was the only trade partner who traded with Cuba. And a lot of what Cuba imported from the Soviet Union was petroleum and petroleum products, stuff to, of course, fuel their cars, but also stuff to make pesticides or pesticide products, stuff like that, which was so badly needed in, their agriculture. But when the Soviet Union fell, all of a sudden those petroleum products were no longer available. And so Cuba had to completely reinvent itself in that sense. And so they brought the farms, so to speak, into the cities and started creating these huge organic inner city gardens. And when I first saw it, man, I was taken a little aback. I was like, "What is that?" They're just like watering these vegetables in this huge field in the middle of Havana. And then, I later came to learn is that, when you do that and you're not using pesticides, it's organic, and then you just have to walk at 1 or 2 blocks to the market to be sold fresh and cheap because you're not spending on transportation costs to the local people there. And I was in those markets. And yes, I purchased the food there, and it was precisely that. So I think there's so many lessons to learn from Cuba.
Right on, Rick. Appreciate that. And speaking of the healthcare system, yeah, Cuba exports doctors all over the world, despite the fact that it's blockaded by the U.S. And their policy is, if the country asks for doctors, they do what they can to deliver to doctors, and many stay there and help. And meanwhile, the U.S. is bombing and threatening wars all over the country and all over the world, and sanctioning and blockading countries. And poor Cuba is economically poor Cuba is sending doctors and healthcare professionals worldwide.
You
What a
know,
test! What a testament!
yeah, Brian, I'm glad you brought that up too, because that was another lesson that I learned on my trip and that I got to see with my very own eyes. So again, I hung out with his brother, Ibrahim, the whole 10 days I was there. And he took me to the schools, he took me to the hospitals, to the clinics, to meet with trade unionists, stuff like that. And while I was there, again, he took me to the hospitals. And when I was inside, I got to meet some of the medical students. And yeah, I distinctly remember that one of the medical students was from El Salvador, which, if you have never listened to our podcast, I'm from El Salvador. So that, of course, stuck in my memory. The other brother was from Nigeria, and I can't remember where the last person was from. But I asked them point blank, I'm like, all right, so what's the deal here? And they told me they're on the spot. We are being schooled here in Cuba, and then wherever the Cuban people send us, that's where we're gonna go for 2 years, and then after that, we are welcome to go back to our country to practice medicine there.
Mm,
Yeah,
fabulous.
I know.
Yep.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. And also, Ibrahim was telling me this, and I guess I had no way to like really look too deeply into this, but he was telling me that in Cuba they have like one doctor for every city block. Which, regardless of what that may actually look like in Cuba, man, I think that is another golden nugget of wisdom that we could have here. That way, that one doctor knows everyone on the block, cares for everyone on the block, sees them regularly, knows them personally,
Mm,
offers healthcare, offers maintenance,
yeah.
so yeah, yeah. Cuba has a lot of nuggets of wisdom for us, man. You know,
Mhm.
it's It's a shame people are so quick to be reactionary and say things like, or point to the quote unquote failures of socialist countries because, man, there's some lessons to be learned, man.
Mhm.
Cuba throughout Latin America is, how could I put it, um, is looked upon for inspiration. Not so much, or not only, I should say, because of the socialist project that has unraveled in Cuba, or Fidel, or Che, but because they stood up to the US, and they've stood up to the US all these years. And, so many Latin American countries haven't been able to do that. So, in that sense, Cuba also is a hero to many Latin American countries, and again should be studied closely because a lot of good lessons, reforms, advances have been made in Cuba.
Right on, Rick. All right, we're gonna end up today's show with an update on the Office and Professional Employees Union 39, Local 39. And if listeners can check out a previous episode where we interviewed the president, and we also did a couple of updates about the strike. It's been going on for 2 weeks now. As of the strike will be suspended, and the workers will return to work tomorrow. And the press release, and it's emphasized suspended strike. And we'll give you more information here, listeners, that Madison, Wisconsin, and this is a release from the union. The OPEIU Local 39 has moved to suspended strike on employer True Stage, formerly CUNA Mutual Group. Approximately 450 workers represented by the union began an unfair labor practice strike on May 19th and have been on strike for more than 2 weeks. The union has filed 9 ULP charges with the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB, citing months of illegal activity by TrueStage. On Friday, June 2nd, hundreds of members met to evaluate the strike and developments in bargaining. Following discussion, union leaders proposed suspending the strike and returning to work on Monday, 6/5/23, tomorrow. During the strike, OPEIU 39 and TrueStage representatives tentatively agreed on priority issues such as job security and remote work flexibility. But with many issues still open, members also voted to authorize a work stoppage within the next 30 days, if necessary. The union and employer have 2 bargaining sessions scheduled this week, June 6th and June 9th, and there will be many more developments at opeiu39.org or at their Facebook page or Twitter or Instagram, and we wish them well in their bargaining this week in solidarity with OPEIU Local 39. And that's a wrap for today, listeners, at We Rise Fight.
Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you again next week. Have a good night, everyone.